The parts, basically, these two parts are your vertical. So it pretty much goes together. And then your gussets go in here. So that's your independent. There's a slot in it, there's grooves on the backside, there's a measure indicator, there's lots going on. So a little assembly is required, but it's not that bad. Now that we have the carriage assembled, by magic, it was done all by itself, here's what the carriage looks like. You can use either side of it. You can mount something on this side, or you can mount something on this side. You can use a block of wood and a screw to hold something that you want to cut, or you can use a chuck. A chuck can be added. And as long as you have an adapter, you're going to need an adapter. And most folks probably have one if they do lathe work. This adapter is a 3/4 inch 10 TPI, and then it matches whatever thread your chuck is, or the threads of your own lathe. The nice thing about it is that this adapter fits on your tailstock, and it's on actually your revolving tailstock, and this adapter for actually putting something on your tailstock of your lathe. So that's why we decided to use a 3/4 inch slot for a 3/4 inch 10 TPI, so you can just mount it onto the jig at any level you want. Now sometimes you got to counterbalance if it's real heavy on this side, but you can choose actually to mount it on the other side and just work on the other side and spin it or move it or angle cut it or whatever you want to do. The idea is that if I wanted to put a radius on something that's held way out here, and I want a radius on it, so what I would do is I would actually mount this guide runner on the back side, that its home lives here, so you don't lose it, and this runs in the T-slot. So now you can actually slide this and adjust it by actually putting a T-bolt in here, putting it over the appropriate hole, lining up the guide. So now you can actually have this adjusted and it will stay put with your T-bolt. Now the nice thing is, this is going to run perpendicular to your table if in fact you put a guide runner in here and follow the track in your table. You can put it anywhere you like. The other item is that if you want a radius on it, you have these different pivot points that have a metal sleeve that will follow a 5/16 T-bolt in your table. So now you choose where that location is going to be. You don't want to cut this off. If you put it in the wrong hole, you end up cutting this off on your bandsaw blade. So you choose the appropriate place where you want that pivot to be. You put your chuck or your other device or whatever you're going to use to clamp something on here, and you have something hanging out there. Now you can actually cut a pivot or a circle on your item. This carriage also can be used at different angles if you just rework it. You can lift this up, remove the rail, the guide rail. Now this can live up here and screw down so you don't lose it, because I know how you guys are. You got sawdust on the floor and you're going to lose that little screw. So just mount it back inside and it'll always be there. But you can actually put this in your, I call it the smiley face. So now you can actually have this anywhere you want the darn thing. But if you want a more precise pivot, you can actually follow one of the holes in the table itself and slide this through. Now it has an exact pivot, and you can mark out any angle on here, tie it down, and you can always draw a line on your raw wood. And that's why I leave this raw wood. I'm a mill worker, have been for 40 years. I've been doing lots of jigs, and I always like to draw something on my jigs, whether it be a note or a straight line or a reference, and then I can always erase it with a little sandpaper. If you choose, you can finish your own. I don't like mine finished, only so I can draw on it. So there's the options of your carriage. If you put your pivot, you're not going to be able to slide it, but if you take your pivot out, you can do many different things. You can use your carriage independently from anything. So you can actually mount an odd-shaped piece if you want to put a special cut on it, and it'll hold it pretty well. You end up, if you don't have anything, just get a block of wood and screw your item to it. Let's just say we're going to cut a cove in this because you need a cove on something, or you need to cut an odd-shaped thing. So pretty much you come in here, you can eyeball it and follow a line that you want to do. Let's just say we're going to come across here, we want something like this. Close to it, but you'll know what your project means and needs. So it pretty much stayed put. I didn't follow the line exactly, but you get the idea of what you can do. You can come in here and put a V-groove in it. You can set up jigs yourself and make dovetail, whatever you want to do. So that's just that part of it. Now if you use the carriage independently, I'm hoping you will invent some indexes or whatever you think you need to do some things either consistently or repeatedly. If you use this carriage with a sled, you have a lot of different things you can do. I happen to put the guide runner on the last groove. So now you can use this back to your miter gauge that we talked about earlier, cutting things. But now you can actually add your carriage, and you can mount it at a pivot or whatever you want to do. Or if you put your guide runner in here, then you can actually follow the track and cut something equally past the blade. So you have this adjustment forward and backwards to align anything. What I'd like to do is cut. I made this decanter, and I really want to have a decanter that has an angled cut on it. So what I want to do is once you have an adapter, a thread adapter, this is a 3/4 inch 10 TPI, teeth per inch, and this is actually a chuck that has a M33 thread on it. You can actually mount it to this and cut at any angle you want when you set this up. So that's what I'm going to do, is set it up. This is put into, I call the smiley face, because now you can move this anywhere you want within this track. So now I can set this at an angle wherever I want it. So pretty much I'm going to install my decanter by using a 3/4 inch bolt and tightening it up. Now this is reaching quite far, but that's okay once you tighten everything down. And look, this is too far, so I can't really slide it. So what I decided to do is put it on the other side. Turn it around, and now you can mount it on the back side. Now it's closer where you need to cut it. I'll take a socket wrench and tighten it down so it doesn't spin or move while we're cutting it. Now this can come independent now that I've taken the guide runner off, and this can be mounted inside its groove, so you can run it either way. I choose to run it this way so it actually ends up in the center, because we reverse this. So now it's still in the center. So I decide, gee, I want about just a small little angle on it. So I can do it freehand. I'll tighten this down. I don't want to cut this off, So I'm going to push it forward a little bit just to make sure I don't accidentally cut off my jig. Turn on your bandsaw, make sure it's tight, and now I'm going to just basically put an angle on it. Oh, missed, because I don't want to stand in front of the camera, so I'll cut it again. Or you can put a curve on it. So, use your imagination. That's what this thing is for. So that'll cut the decanter on a chuck. Of course, a chuck is a real handy thing to clamp anything. You can put a piece of wood in it. You can put odd-shaped things in it because it'll grab it. So that's why I like to use a chuck on this, if you have a lathe or not. A chuck is a really handy item to use on this. The nice thing about using an adapter is that you can leave the adapter attached and in its original place. Take this back to the lathe and then screw it back on for another action, and it goes exactly where you left off because it was tied up against it. Here's just a blank piece of wood that I want to put a curve on it, one way or the other. So basically you can use this jig if you put a pivot attachment into your table, throw your pivot, decide the distance away from the blade that you want. I choose 7 inches. There's 7 inches right there. Tighten it down. I use just a socket. And now you can choose one of these 4. I wouldn't choose this one because you're going to cut the darn thing off. So make sure you're oriented correctly. The reason why these other ones here, what happens if you want to pivot way back here and you need the throw of your carriage? Or you can run it backwards. So I chose 7 and this one because it clears. Now that I can pivot this, I can actually use a clamp and actually put partial curves on any piece of plywood or any material you want by using those other clamps that I showed you earlier. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to slide the carriage in here. With this guide rudder on the bottom. So now this gives me the flexibility of moving this towards or away from the blade so I can adjust where I want this to land as a cut. So I'm going to choose to mount this particular chuck with this item in it on the face of this. Oh, I need an adapter. These adapters, I'm sure a lot of lathe people have these, but these are available independently through a bunch of catalogs. And it has the thread of your chuck or your spindle on your lathe, and then a 3/4 10 teeth per inch. So you mount that on the other side, locate kind of the height you need, so you can add your chuck to it and remove it if you want. This is just a bowl I never finished. But it's a piece of wood that could be any project of yours at any shape. But this is how we will cut actually a crown on top of this. So see, it doesn't quite reach, so you can adjust this to find out. Now, how do you know where to go? Well, you know kind of what the radius is going to be, so you can put a stick on here and figure out where it's going to land. But you see how this is tilting? Because this is heavy and it's not tight. Once you tighten this, it'll stay put. But sometimes, you know, you may want to put a counterbalance or put it on the other side, but it'll cut off the other end, so you don't want to do that. So I know that this is probably going to be close, but we're going to cut it shallow just so you can see how you can adjust it later on. So turn on the saw. Hang on to it, keeping your fingers clear of the blade. It's on its pivot point. Start in slow. And have a consistent cut. Now see, I didn't quite make it. Okay, since you can see that we cut this and we kind of guessed at it, there's an easier way to do it to get a more precise cut. What you do is you back your unit off a little bit, turn it around, and you know, there's a measuring device here and a scale. So if you, in fact, know where 0 is, and you tighten it down and it touches the blade, tighten it down there, and read what the scale says. It reads 5.5. So you can write that down, 5.5, and you actually, you can write it right here because you can sand it off later, or put it on a tablet, or put it on here. So now you know where 0 is. Now you want to actually know to cut this a little bit more, so if you're just putting a crown on this. But what happens if you want to cut way back here and then glue it back together later because you're putting a veneer piece in here for a detail? Well, if you know how far to go back, then all you got to do is subtract and figure out, gee, I'm going to push this 1.5 inches. So I'm going to bring this down to 4 inches, and now the cut will be back in here. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to actually move this, so you can't turn it. You got to back it off because it's going to pinch the blade because it's a curve and this is a flat. So back it off. I know I want to set this at 4 inches. I'll set it at 4 inches. Tighten it down. And now you can see how far back it's going to cut back here, which is what I want. So if you use your scale with this, and you know how to operate it, and it already has been zeroed out, you always kind of know where you can go just by either jotting it down. I have to jot things down these days because my memory is fading me. So I jot it down always. Turn the saw on. You know, it's not a speed in a race. Let the saw do its work and let it cut. Now this piece will drop. So now you have a nice curve. Now, in time, if this was a bowl, hollowed, it's just a solid piece right now, we could actually sandwich something here and glue it back. And then do another one. Or turn this and do a cross. And then we'll talk about an indexer later. So that's how this is done. So imagine your project, you setting up your own, and figure out how you can work it. Use your measuring device, use your sled, use your carriage. Let's pretend this is a real fancy vessel. I just made something simple, and I put it in a chuck. Well, what I did is I cut a piece of scrap plywood, and I made it the width of my cut, and I made it the length, which is to the end of this, and inside where this is going to bottom out, the dovetail is going to bottom out, and it bottoms out at the end of this, in the inside of this jaw. So now what we can do is if you orient these jaws perfectly up and down and horizontal, now I can take this out and put this scrap piece in there with the chuck and practice on a scrap piece. So if you loosen this, now I've already tightened this tight, so you should be able just to undo this. But being as that this is already on here, just for a demonstration, I'm going to take it off and put that piece of plywood on so you can see what's going on. Nice thing about the chuck staying put is that you can take things off and put things on anywhere you want. Now, what I want to do is put this piece of plywood in a proper spot. Open it up. Now, you know, if I was smart, I would put a little mark on here to center it. Here and here, measure over, but you could take a tape and kind of center it. So this is going to equal where this is 7/8, and the other side is 15/16. It's just a hair off. So I'll slide it over just a hair. I'm going to tighten it down. So now you have a blank piece that you can spin through this, and you can even make lines on this template. You know, any shop always has a lot of scrap wood. Go to your local cabinet maker or somebody and get some scrap wood, because it's always nice to do something on a piece of scrap wood than on your final product. Okay, we have our test piece mounted in a chuck, and we put it on here. I've got adjustability. It's at a pivot point, and I made some marks. There's 2 inch, 4 inch, 6 inches. I just made a little mark on here because that's kind of where I probably want to have my radius on that vessel I showed you earlier. So I want to know where that crown is going to be at the very top. So I'm going to zero this out again. Just touch it, tighten it, and it's at 9 and 11/16. So I write it down. 9 11/16 is 0 equals 0. So now I want to cut that very tip of that vessel out. So I'm going to back it off, let's say 5/16. So we move it back. You got 9 and 11 minus 5/16. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there you go. It's set. I just took that subtraction right off of these lines here. And now supposedly this will come real close to this end here. So let's give it a go. Now it vibrates a little bit, but this is a test piece, so you want to see where your arcs are going to be. So that's going to cut the very end, and we know what that number is. What is it? It's 9 3/8. So top, 9 3/8. So now I can decide where I want to do the first cut, and then glue it back together, and do another cut, and glue it back together, because I'm going to have accent marks in this vessel. So we can take this off. Let's decide. Let's say, gee, do we want to work from the bottom up or from the top down on our vessel? All right, just for giggles, we're going to start right in the middle. You can do anything you want. It's your jig. So I measure this, and I'm actually putting that little line right there. That's where I want it to end up on my vessel, because I've already planned it out. Now I can write that number down. It's 6 and 7/16, and I put mid. All my answers are right here. So when I forget, I can go look. So remove this. Add the thing you're going to put a radius on. Nice and snug. And the carriage is tight, so now we're going to cut. So, when I was going through, I forgot to put a line on there. I always try to put a line on there so when I go back together, I know exactly where it came out. But it's pretty semi-woodworker proof, because it's going to be kind of hard not to glue it in the right spot because of the curves. So that's how you do that. Glue something in there, start all over again.